Hello and welcome to the third and last section of our presentation on education in Southeast Europe. I want to begin this presentation by talking again about Wolfgang Höpken and his assessment of the approach of the Communist Party when it was in power toward education and toward the teaching of history. And here's what we could probably say broadly about Wolfgang Höpken. That he argues that as a way of recognizing difference rather than trying to suppress it, and as a way of reducing social tension, the communist approach to history education may have been largely successful, or at least it was successful for as long as the state, as the regime controlled by the Communist Party, was successful. But as a way of promoting a shared base of common knowledge, a shared identity and a shared sense that conflicts of the past had been transcended, that we were leaving behind, it seems to have failed. In particular, it failed on this point of providing a shared base of common knowledge. And there was a reason probably why it failed in this, and that's this, that any effort to address the deficit of shared knowledge would probably have had the effect of increasing political tension, because it would raise issues that were sensitive, that were the object of dispute, and would be regarded as an imposition. To give you one example, what you see here are two pictures that are taken very near the memorial complex of Jasenovac. Jasenovac was a prison camp and death camp that was run by the collaborationist regime in Croatia, a regime led by the Ustaše during the period of the Second World War. And it was the site of deportation for many of the victims of organized mass killing during the Second World War. The main groups there were Serbs, Jews, and Roma. Now, we know a lot about what happened in Jasenovac. Many people claim that the history has been suppressed. I don't think it's been suppressed, although it's been distorted in several ways. One of the areas on which, topics on which there is dispute, is the number of victims that were killed in the Jasenovac camp. Now, the low estimate is that there may have been as few as 20 or 30,000. This is an estimate that is given by people on the margins. There are also people who deny that killings took place at all. They say, well, some people died, but it was something more like a summer camp. But as you can imagine, this is a marginal view. This is a view that is associated with historical denial. The maximal estimate is what you see in the picture on the right. And this is a fence that somebody put up as a makeshift memorial on their farm across the river from Jasenovac. So that large statue that you see is the official memorial. And here's the unofficial memorial where a person is put on the fence of his farm. Symbols, the wheel is the symbol for the Roma community, the Orthodox cross is the symbol for the Serbian community, and the six-pointed star is the symbol of the Jewish community, and the number of the maximal estimate of victims, 700,000. So the maximal claim is that there were 700,000 victims of mass killing in Jasenovac. Were there 700,000 victims of mass killing in Jasenovac? Most probably not, and most of the evidence suggests that this is impossible. If you want to take a camp like Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland, which was much larger, technologically equipped, that was designed for the purpose of expressly killing the largest number of people possible, and that was in operation for about 3 years, there they killed 2 million. If they didn't get above 2 million or so at Auschwitz-Birkenau, they certainly didn't get to 700,000 at Jasenovac. The accurate number, and what we have for these is always ranges. There are no exact numbers for any of the genocides that have occurred in history, is probably something like 80 or 90,000. But you'll find people fighting over insistence on the smaller numbers, the larger numbers, the middle range, whatever. Raising this question is bound to cause a fight, and it carries with it subsidiary questions, like who were the collaborators? Who were the people who carried out the killing? Who supported them? Was there support on a political basis or an ethnic basis, and so on? Any one of these questions would have been explosive in the context of post-World War II Yugoslavia. What the decision was to try to avoid them by assuring, for the most part, that if they got raised at all, they got raised in only the narrowest and most constrained ways. But what this came to look like was not decision, but indecision. It came to look like weakness. It came to look like lack of persuasiveness. The story that was told about the traumatic experience of the Second World War was incomplete, and telling an incomplete story opened up the path for all kinds of distortion, for openly nationalist interpretations that came to have stronger popular appeal. And when the state socialist regime falls apart, the state of Yugoslavia falls apart, new states are established on a national basis, these national interpretations become official interpretations. So after 1990, history teaching, after a long period when the communists were trying to denationalize it, becomes renationalized. History is transformed into a field of training for nationalist politics. And this is where the pieces of research from the project led by Christina Kuluri that I asked you to read for this session become important. Now I have a longish quotation here from Christina Kuluri, which I will not read out to you, but I'll just be quiet for a moment and give you a moment to read that for yourselves. There are a lot of directions that you can go in interpreting this quotation and deciding what to do with it. I think that the things that I would emphasize is that at this period of the end of the regime and establishment of new ones, one of the things that she underlines here is feelings of uncertainty and insecurity, leading to a call for a kind of historical nostalgia, which often means celebration of identities in a manner that is exclusive, that observers from outside will tend to look at as being extreme. So the rewriting of history, history in the communist period was always condemned as having been restructured to be political in purpose. The rewriting of history is also political in purpose, but we don't necessarily know what ways it will go. What ways do we think it is going? Well, here are some possibilities. First, we can talk about history as a manner in which the way that history is taught as a process through which old myths are replaced by new ones. In this transformation from state socialism to a series of nationalist states with tendencies to become liberal states, this often means replacement of myths of peace and unity and equality with national myths, myths of superiority, of exclusivity, of guilt and innocence. But in any case, we can think of the way that history is taught as a process of elevating some events in history and some interpretations of them into memory, and of consigning others to being forgotten. That is, of some myths being promoted and other myths being demoted. Another way that we can think of the teaching of history is as a way of training people to identify friends and enemies by telling the story of the good and bad things that were done by older representatives of various groups in times. And probably if you want to trace the ways in which friends and enemies are identified, look at the way that the Ottoman Empire is approached in the teaching of history, the rhetorical position of the successor state of the Ottoman Empire of Turkey in most histories in the Balkans. There are some versions of it that talk about a period of intense collaboration and development and of close relations between the nations and the Ottoman center, and some who look at the Ottoman Empire as an occupier or repressor. Now, it's not my position to say that one of those interpretations is right and that another one is wrong. It's a subject for discussion. What I want to say is that the way that the story is told to emphasize which of those sides is right and which of those is wrong is going to tell you a lot about the ideological ways in which the teaching of history is being used, the ways in which history becomes an instrument or a form of politics. And then finally, one thing that I would say, because a lot of what I have just said seems to sound a little bit like a dismissal of the teaching of history, or a way of saying that the teaching of history is suspect, is politically instrumental. It is in some ways. I mean, education has obvious uses as a process of promoting division, as a process of intensification of conflict. What I want to leave as an open question, and what I hope we might be able to address during our discussion when we meet, is whether we can take seriously the possibility that education also has potential uses as an instrument of mutual recognition, of reconciliation, that is, as a way of promoting understanding, through the promotion of knowledge in the same way that knowledge can be used to promote the absence of understanding. So that is the big question that I want to leave you with, and I'll look forward to seeing you at our session.